welcome back to another solo episode of the Building Your Brand podcast. And today I want to talk about the topic of comfort zones. Now, I don't know if anybody else feels the same as me, but I kind of get annoyed when I hear coaches or business mentors or kind of anyone online just spouting advice like you just need to get outside of your comfort zone. Now, I'm not saying that that is not good advice. I'm just saying I think it lacks a lot of nuance and it frustrates me how simplistic it is because I think there's so much more to it. It's not just a case of deciding, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get outside of my comfort zone. So I wanted to dive into it a bit and I guess kind of my experience with it and my thinking on it to maybe add a little bit more nuance and a little bit more context. So as I said at the beginning, I don't think it's bad advice. I do think that sometimes we need to push ourselves out of our comfort zone, but I also think there's a reason that it's called a comfort zone. And I think we can easily slip into in our businesses thinking that we constantly have to be pushing ourselves, constantly have to be growing in all areas, constantly have to be doing all of the things. And sometimes I think it's okay to choose a season, a period of time of like comfort and ease and not needing to be pushing ourselves all of the time. And for some people, that period of time might actually be really, really long. For other people, it might be shorter. But I think you need those like different seasons in your business. I think for me, I have stopped thinking about it as a comfort zone and I've started thinking about it more as my capacity for discomfort. And so this doesn't necessarily mean that I'm always uncomfortable in my business, but I have come to see how a certain level of discomfort and a certain tolerance for discomfort is beneficial to me in my business. And I can give a few examples of how I think that has played out for me this year. Okay, before I do that, I think there's like another thing that I want to talk about, which is if we are talking about comfort zones, we've got a comfortable zone in the middle, let's say, and then we have like different zones coming out of there. And I don't think we should necessarily be jumping from the middle zone right to the outside ring. I think with pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone or increasing our capacity for discomfort, we need to do it one step at a time. And we need to have the sort of confidence that the next step, yes, it's pushing us in our business, but it's also like it also makes sense. It's also doable. There's no point pushing yourself out of your comfort zone to try and do something that you are not qualified to do. I mean, maybe in some niche instances there are. So, like me pitching to do a workshop in After Effects would be hideously out of my comfort zone because I am completely unqualified to do it. And maybe someone would believe that I can do it and say yes, and then would find out that actually I can't do it. And that would not be a beneficial use of my time. It would not be a strategic decision for my business. So I do think that there has to be some sort of like realism with what we are pushing ourselves to do. You need to have a certain level of belief in yourself that you can take this next step. So I think that's something that I want to caveat with. So I guess the examples I can give, I've started to notice this process that I go through when I am pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. So my example for this year would be speaking at Adobe Max London. So that was a really big event. It was the biggest event I'd spoken at. I think there was 750 people in the audience. It was silent disco style, which was also something that I had never done before. And it was on a big stage and it was a big deal because it was Adobe. Now, I have done plenty of public speaking before, so I knew I could do it, but I also really did feel like this was a big push and this was the next step. And I had to go through the process of the emotions that went with that, so there was nerves. And, a lot of people very kindly said to me, it's good that you feel nervous. That shows that you care about it. And I did really care about it. And I cared about doing a good job. I wanted Adobe to be happy with the job that I did. I wanted to be true to myself and my values as I showed up on stage. So yeah, I did really, really care about it. So yeah, there was the nerves. And it was really interesting to see how those manifested themselves, I guess. I think we all have different ways of like processing and dealing with nerves. So, in this instance, I made sure that I was very well prepared. I had rehearsed my talk a lot. I'd sent a sort of run through to the organizers so they knew what I was going to be talking about. I was doing a session with someone else, so I'd sort of collaborated with him on what the content was going to be. So yeah, I spent a lot of time preparing for it. This was not something that I was going to just like wing it and see what happens. I also did lose sleep about it. So this for me is the classic sign that I have pushed myself and I am feeling discomfort. I start to have sort of anxiety dreams about the whatever it is that's coming up. Not to a point that it's like really terrible and I'm losing weeks and weeks of sleep, but I'll lose a night of sleep here and there in the lead up to the event. And then the night before the event, I barely slept at all. I woke up at 5 a.m. and I was feeling stressed. So I had a bath, which I never have baths, but I was like, I need to find a way to help myself to relax. One of the things that was really cool is although I was like really nervous in the night and I felt really stressed, when it actually came to the day and I got up and I got ready and I like met up with people and the event started, like I actually felt way less nervous than I expected. So I was very, very grateful for that because based on the night that I just had, I was like, oh my goodness. But the good thing is that even though I felt the nerves, I knew that it was something that I could do. Like I'd done it before, maybe not on this scale. And so that really helped. And so for me, this felt like a really healthy level of discomfort. And the nerves and the lack of sleep was the sign to me, I guess, that I was pushing myself. This was the next step. And I knew that once I had done this, then the next time I did something similar, I was going to feel the nerves a lot less. I've definitely started to see that pattern. It's sort of collecting that data and knowing, okay, I've done this thing now. I know I can do it. So next time I know I won't be quite as nervous. That's not to say the nerves go completely, because obviously every event, the nerves are there. But I think that is the process and the sign to me now that I am pushing myself, a good amount. And obviously, I could not function if I was pushing myself to that level all of the time, partly because I would never sleep. And I think, it does do stuff, in your body. It raises your levels of stress. You have to like push yourself in all different ways. There's like physical impacts to that as well. So I know that it wouldn't be healthy for me to be pushing myself in that way all of the time. But I do feel like having a capacity for discomfort and not freaking out about it and knowing that that is normal. Like it's normal that this thing that I haven't done before doesn't feel comfortable to me at this point. And so getting used to that and not fearing it has been really, really beneficial. Just accepting it as part of the process. And I think this is a journey I've been on, with lots of things in my business. I think the rejection challenge is really, really similar. It's coming to accept that this kind of negative, or what's perceived to be negative emotion or hard emotion or hard feeling, isn't something that I need to worry about. It's normal. It's part of the process. It won't last forever. And so I can tolerate it for this short period of time to get me to this next step, to the next ring of the comfort zone, should we say. Now, I do think that the comfort zone is going to look different for everybody. And what feels like a stretch and a push to me is going to look very different from what feels like a stretch and a push for you. So for example, I was at an event the other day where they asked people to raise their hands if they hated the sound of their own voice. And I didn't raise my hand. That's not to say that I love the sound of my own voice, but part of having a podcast and part of creating videos online like this one and creating content is I've just had to get used to the sound of my own voice because it was the only way that I was going to be able to get on and do this stuff. So at the start, it felt uncomfortable, but now it does not feel uncomfortable to me at all. It feels very easy to create content, to make videos, to record podcast episodes. For the other people in the room, their comfort zone levels were different from mine. For them, it did feel really uncomfortable to have to hear the sound of their own voice. So that was like the next circle in their sort of comfort zone that they needed to push through to get to the next level. And I think, yeah, we need to acknowledge that our levels of discomfort, our capacity for discomfort are going to be different from everybody else's. And I think this is what frustrates me with the sort of comfort zone narrative, is it just feels very like, oh, you just need to do this thing. You just need to push yourself. You just need to get out of your comfort zone. Like, I don't disagree, but I think there's a lot more to it than that. And I think another thing that should be acknowledged as well, is like there's certain privileges that allow me to push myself maybe a bit more out of my comfort zone than someone else, for example. Like things like I can take a risk, in my business. I'm not the only earner in the family. So, if I take a risk, it's not going to have necessarily like a completely detrimental impact on our income if something goes wrong and I have to sort of, refocus, or I lose out on some income, or I lose a project or something. So there's like elements of risk that I can take that I would not be able to take if I was like the solo earner for our family. I think another thing is like the support that I have around me. So I have the capacity to like pay for support. So in that instance, I worked with Charlotte Lewis, who's been a guest on the podcast before. And we just did one session together so that I could run through my talk and could give me feedback and advice. So I can pay for support in these situations. I also have like a very strong support network of friends and business owners around me who help me with those things. And this is not meant to be like a brag of like, oh, look at this amazing situation that I'm in, but it's just acknowledging that this is another factor as to why people's capacity for discomfort and their ability to push themselves out of their comfort zone is going to look different from person to person, because there's so many different factors. I've just touched on a few of them, but there's so many different factors that could impact that. But I do want to share with you, so a conversation I had the other day, it was actually with one of my clients, Sally Webster, and I was being interviewed on her podcast, and she shared this thought about how we have sort of warped expectations for our life and how we feel about it. And she was saying, that often we're aiming for kind of like 95% happiness and 5% negative stuff going on in our life. And she really encouraged me that we need to think of it more 50-50, that we need to lower our expectations. And actually, as a result, we'll feel more content with life. But this sort of working towards this sort of aspiration for like 90% of the time being happy is actually really causing us problems. And that really resonated with me, because we also talked about how like you need the negative emotions to really appreciate the positive emotions, and they all kind of go together to make this fuller picture. And so I think that applies to our businesses as well. Like I think often we feel pressure that everything has to be going really well all of the time, otherwise our business is failing, or 90% of the time, otherwise our business is failing. And I think if we were able to embrace more of this like 50-50 mindset, there's going to be highs and lows, and we kind of need the lows like we actually learn a lot more in the lows, and we need those sort of emotions, those experiences that we might perceive to be negative, to fuel us and teach us and encourage us and help us appreciate when things go well as well. So, obviously, there's so much more that could be said about this, but I thought it would be interesting, again, with a lot of these episodes, just to start the conversation, see what resonates, see what other people have to say. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I would love to hear whether discomfort is something that you kind of actively pursue in your business or your creativity, your process. And yeah, let's carry on chatting. You can find me at Liz M. Mosley or at Building Your Brand Podcast on Instagram, and I would love to hear your thoughts.